Number 1. The U-28 Sea Monster. It is late July of 1915, in the cold grey water of the North Atlantic, south of Ireland near the Fastnet Rock. A German submarine called U-28 is hunting British shipping. Her commander is Captain Lieutenant Georg Günther von Forstner, a decorated and respected officer whose word carried weight among his peers. What he claimed to see that day has haunted the edge of naval history ever since. U-28 had just torpedoed a British steamer, the Iberian, a cargo vessel of roughly 5,200 tons. The ship went down bow first, dragged under by the flooding weight of her forward holds. Then, from deep below the surface, came a violent explosion. Von Forstner believed it was the ship's boilers imploding under pressure, or her cargo detonating in the dark, and in that eruption of water and wreckage, something enormous was hurled into the air. Picture it with him. A great animal thrown 20 to 30 meters upward, tumbling against the sky before falling back into the foam. He described it as about 60 feet long, shaped like a crocodile, with 4 limbs ending in webbed feet and a long pointed tail. 6 men, including von Forstner himself, said they watched it for 10 to 15 seconds before it vanished beneath the waves. Now, why does this story survive when so many sailors' tales are forgotten? Because of the man telling it. An officer of his rank was not a superstitious deckhand. His account was published in the 1930s, and later the great cataloger of sea mysteries, Bernard Heuvelmans, recorded it in 1968. The Iberian herself had been steaming from Manchester toward South Africa when the torpedo found her, an ordinary merchant ship on an ordinary voyage. Over the decades, the account has been repeatedly tangled with other wartime sea serpent reports, until it is hard to separate what von Forstner actually wrote from what later authors added. That confusion is part of why it endures. It is just solid enough to resist dismissal, and just vague enough to invite belief. But look closer, because the skeptics have a powerful case. A ship's boilers, imploding at depth, can eject a huge mass of debris toward the surface with tremendous force. What the crew saw may have been torn wreckage, tangled pipework, or a dead whale caught in the blast. Irish waters teem with basking sharks, which can exceed 8 meters and rot into strange serpentine shapes. And there is a harder problem. The surviving war diary does not describe the animal at all. No photograph exists. No physical trace was ever recovered. The webbed, 4-limbed body von Forstner described matches no known whale or shark. So we are left with a decorated officer, 6 named witnesses, and absolutely nothing to hold in our hands. Modern biologists file it away as anecdote, unverifiable, and unrepeatable. And yet the pattern it sets will follow us all the way down. The sea kept the proof. It always does. Number 2. The UB-85 Sea Beast. Stay in the same war, but move the terror onto the deck of the submarine itself. The legend tells of another German boat, UB-85, surfacing at night in April of 1918, only to be attacked by a creature rising out of the black water. The story says it had a horned head and large glowing eyes, and that it seized the deck and the forward gun with such strength that the submarine could no longer dive. Her commander, Günther Kresch, supposedly told his British captors that the beast fought them until they drove it off, but by then the boat was too damaged to submerge. It is a magnificent story. It is also almost certainly not true, at least not the monster part. Here is what actually happened. UB-85 was sunk on April 30th, 1918 by a British patrol vessel, the drifter Coreopsis, off the coast of Northern Ireland. The entire crew, around 34 men, survived and were taken prisoner. That detail is the seed of the myth because the whole crew, surrendering without a fight, begged for an explanation. The mundane truth is that a mechanical fault, most likely a problem with her batteries or venting, left the boat unable to dive. Unable to escape beneath the surface, she was caught and destroyed. Type UB 3 boats like her displaced about 510 tons on the surface and carried a crew of roughly 34. Now here is where it becomes genuinely eerie. In 2016, engineers laying a subsea power cable across the Irish Sea found a submarine wreck, almost perfectly intact, about 45 meters long, resting off the Stranraer coast. The survey vessels of the power company had stumbled onto a ghost. The marine archaeologist Innes McCartney examined it and cautioned that it might be UB-85 or it might be her nearly identical sister boat, UB-82. And McCartney did something the legend hated. He explained the whole affair through the known design flaws of these early submarines, the very faults that could trap a boat on the surface. The Coreopsis was a small anti-submarine patrol craft, exactly the kind of humble vessel that hunted U-boats in the Irish Sea approaches, a stretch of water that became a killing ground for German submarines trying to break out into the Atlantic. The wreck's rediscovery in 2016 sent the old legend racing back through the newspapers, headlines pairing a horned sea beast against the sober reality of a corroded steel hull lying quiet on the seabed. The glowing eyes, likely phosphorescent water, or exhausted men seeing things in the dark. So consider the strange shape of this story. A real wreck locatable on the seabed, wrapped inside a monster that never existed. Sometimes the deep does not need a beast. Sometimes the true horror is the machine failing in the cold and the dark, with no way down and nowhere to hide. Number 3. The Chinese Song-class surfacing beside USS Kitty Hawk. Leave the folklore behind now because what comes next is fully modern, fully documented, and in some ways more unsettling. It is late October of 2006 in the East China Sea near Okinawa. The United States carrier Kitty Hawk, hull number CV-63, is steaming through open water surrounded by her escorts. A carrier strike group is one of the most heavily defended formations on Earth, ringed by anti-submarine aircraft, sonar, and warships whose entire purpose is to know what lies beneath them. And then, without warning, a submarine breaks the surface within about 5 nautical miles of the carrier. It is a Chinese type 039. Song-class boat, a diesel-electric submarine displacing around 2,250 tons submerged, armed with torpedoes and anti-ship missiles. It had slipped inside the screen, into the range where it could have launched an attack, and no one had found it. The submarine was detected only after it chose to surface. Think about what that means. The approach went entirely unseen. The head of United States Pacific Command at the time, Admiral William Falloon, acknowledged the incident publicly and made no secret of his concern. Why could it happen? Because a diesel-electric boat running on its batteries is astonishingly quiet, in some conditions quieter than the nuclear submarines that hunt it. Analysts argued for years afterward about whether it was a deliberate message from Beijing or simply an opportunistic encounter, and China never clarified, leaving the intent hanging in the water. Song-class boats are built for coastal, littoral operations and can recharge their batteries through a snorkel while barely disturbing the surface, prowling the shallows where a nuclear boat is less at home. Naval observers compared the surfacing to the old Cold War habit of submarines popping up beside rival warships purely to prove they could, a silent boast that says we were here the whole time and you never knew. What it demonstrated was undeniable. The quiet diesel boat had become a genuine threat in the Western Pacific, a centerpiece of what strategists call anti-access area denial. Kitty Hawk herself, one of the last conventionally powered American supercarriers, was retired in 2009. But the lesson outlived her, and it drove a wave of investment in undersea surveillance across the region. Hold on to one question as we go deeper. If an entire carrier group could be blindsided by a single quiet boat, what happens when 2 submarines, both built for silence, go looking for the same patch of ocean and never hear each other at all? Number 4. The HMS Vanguard and Le Triomphant collision. That question has an answer, and it is one of the strangest collisions in naval history. In early February of 2009, somewhere in the mid-Atlantic, 2 nuclear-armed ballistic missile submarines collided while both were submerged. One was HMS Vanguard, the lead boat of the Royal Navy's deterrent fleet carrying Trident missiles. The other was the French submarine Le Triomphant, carrying France's own nuclear missiles. Each was on continuous at-sea deterrent patrol, the silent, endless mission of hiding beneath the ocean so that a nation's retaliatory strike can never be destroyed. And here is the paradox at the heart of it. These boats are engineered to be as quiet as human ingenuity allows. Their hulls are covered in sound-absorbing and echoic tiles. Their machinery is mounted to deaden vibration. They are built to vanish. And they succeeded so completely that they vanished from each other. Neither sonar detected the other in time. 2 vessels, each displacing roughly 14 to 15,000 tons submerged, drifted together in the black water, and touched. Vanguard came away with dents and scrapes along her hull. Le Triomphant damaged her sonar dome, and when she limped back to her base at Ile Longue, the damage was at first blamed vaguely on striking a submerged object. No one was hurt, no reactor was breached, no missile was compromised. But consider how close it came. Between them, these two boats carried enough nuclear firepower to define the security of two nations, and they collided because they could not hear each other. The reason is almost darkly comic. Britain and France do not share the exact patrol boxes of their deterrent submarines, so each was hiding from the world, including its own ally. Between the two of them, the boats carried scores of nuclear warheads through that moment of impact. Senior officers on both sides, including Britain's First Sea Lord, publicly played down the strategic risk while privately treating the near miss with deadly seriousness. The ocean is vast, which makes such a meeting wildly improbable, and that improbability points to a chilling truth. They were both drawn to the same quiet lanes of deep water. The incident forced a hard look at how Allied navies keep their submarines from occupying the same space. Stealth built to hide them from enemies had hidden them from friends, and their rivals, as we are about to see, were playing exactly the same game. Number 5, the USS Baton Rouge and Kostroma collision. Rewind to February 11th, 1992, in the cold Barents Sea off Russia's Kola Peninsula. The Soviet Union had collapsed only weeks earlier, but beneath the waves the old contest went on as if nothing had changed. The American submarine Baton Rouge, hull number SSN 689, a Los Angeles-class attack boat, was operating in or near Russian territorial waters, almost certainly on a surveillance mission. Nearby, unseen, moved a Russian submarine, B-276 Kostroma, a Sierra-class boat with a hull made of titanium, fast and deep-diving and expensive. And then, the two of them collided in the dark. The Kostroma rose to the surface afterward, her sail damaged by the impact. Baton Rouge, hurt but intact, made her way back to port. What happened next tells you everything about the pride wrapped up in these encounters. The Russian crew reportedly painted a small victory star on the Kostroma's sail, marking the collision like a kill. For the new government in Moscow, under Boris Yeltsin, it became a diplomatic grievance, proof that foreign submarines still prowled close to Russian bases. And they did. The Barents Sea was the bastion of the Northern Fleet's ballistic missile submarines, and American attack boats went there to listen, to shadow, to learn. That closeness was the whole point, and it was also the danger. Both governments gave conflicting accounts of who was at fault and exactly where it happened. Baton Rouge, a boat displacing about 6,900 tons submerged, was decommissioned in 1995, earlier than many of her sisters, though the Navy pointed to cost. The collision joined a long list of undersea bumping incidents stretching back through the Cold War. There had been earlier scrapes in these same waters through the 1980s, boats nudging each other in the dark as American crews pressed close to listen, and Soviet crews tried to shake them off. The collapse of the Soviet Union changed the flags and the politics, but it did not change the geography, and the geography was what kept pulling the submarines together. Shadowing another submarine in total darkness invites exactly this kind of contact, and at least both crews understood the sea around them was hostile. The next boat we descend to made the opposite mistake. It did not collide in the deep. It ran aground where the entire world could stand on the shore and stare at it. Number 6. The Whiskey on the Rocks grounding. On October 27, 1981, a Soviet submarine designated S-363 drove herself hard onto the rocks of the Blekinge archipelago in Swedish waters near the major naval base at Karlskrona. She was a Whiskey-class boat, an aging diesel-electric design from the 1950s, and the incident earned a nickname that spread around the world: Whiskey on the Rocks. The submarine was grounded deep inside Swedish territorial waters, in an area strictly forbidden to foreign vessels. The next morning, Swedish fishermen found her sitting there, tilted and helpless, an intruder in plain daylight. The Soviet Union claimed it was all an accident, a navigation error caused by faulty equipment and bad weather. Sweden was not convinced. The Swedes detained the boat for roughly 10 days and investigated. And then came the detail that turned an embarrassment into a crisis. Using gamma-ray spectroscopy, Swedish analysts concluded the submarine most likely carried nuclear-armed torpedoes. A foreign submarine, possibly carrying nuclear weapons, had grounded itself beside a Swedish naval base. The commander, Anatoly Gushchin, and a senior officer aboard could offer no explanation that erased the suspicion of espionage, because a boat does not blunder that deep into a restricted military zone by accident. Sweden refloated the submarine and released her on November 6, 1981, escorting her back to international waters. Now, this is why the grounding stands apart from the famous Swedish submarine hunts of that decade. Those hunts chased phantom intruders that Sweden pursued and never found. This boat was found, boarded, photographed, and studied. She was real, and she was stuck. The affair hardened Swedish opinion against the Soviet Union and drove a decade of increased coastal surveillance. It remains one of the most humiliating submarine episodes Moscow ever suffered. The location made the innocent explanation almost impossible to believe, because Karlskrona was one of the most sensitive naval bases in the Baltic, precisely the kind of target a submarine might creep toward to gather intelligence. For a country built on armed neutrality, the sight of a Soviet boat stranded within view of that base was a national shock. And it reshaped Swedish defense thinking for the rest of the decade. Navigation put that boat on the rocks. The encounter we descend to next was about something worse than a wrong turn. It was about a crew that could no longer tell a signal from the beginning of the end of the world. Number 7. The B-59 near launch. Of every encounter in this descent, this is the one that came closest to ending everything, and it involved no monster and no collision at all. The date is October 27th, 1962, the most dangerous day of the Cuban Missile Crisis, near the American quarantine line around Cuba. A Soviet Foxtrot-class diesel submarine, B-59, was one of 4 boats sent toward the island. What the Americans did not know was that each of these submarines carried a nuclear-tipped torpedo. United States Navy ships, including the destroyer Beale, detected B-59 and began dropping practice depth charges, meant only as a signal to force the boat to surface. But the crew of B-59 could not tell the difference between a signal and an attack. Inside the submarine, conditions had become a nightmare. She had been submerged so long that the temperature climbed above 45 to 50 degrees Celsius. Carbon dioxide was building in the air, the batteries were failing, men were fainting. And crucially, the boat had lost radio contact with Moscow, so her officers did not know whether war had already begun on the surface far above them. The captain, Valentin Savitsky, believing the worst, reportedly wanted to launch the nuclear torpedo, but launching it required 3 officers to agree. 2 would have said yes. The third was Vasily Arkhipov, the chief of staff of the entire flotilla, who happened to be aboard that boat. And Arkhipov refused. He held the line, arguing against a launch that could have triggered a nuclear exchange and dragged the world into war. B-59 surfaced instead, was observed by the American ships, and eventually turned back toward home. The other 3 Foxtrot submarines sent toward Cuba endured the same suffocating heat and the same American pressure. Each of them a diesel boat designed for cold northern oceans and utterly unsuited to the tropics. Any one of them could have become the flashpoint. It was on B-59 that the decision fell, and it fell to a single man in a failing, overheated compartment with no way to know what was happening in the world above. The full story stayed buried for decades, emerging around 2002 through the work of the National Security Archive and researchers like Thomas Blanton. Today, Arkhipov is remembered as the man who saved the world. Historians still debate how to frame it. Was it individual heroism, or the last safeguard in a broken system, or simply luck that the right man stood in the right compartment? The deep had nearly ended all of it. And still, crews kept going back down into waters no chart could ever make safe. Number 8. The USS San Francisco Seamount collision. On January 8, 2005, about 360 nautical miles southeast of Guam, the American attack submarine San Francisco, hull number SSN-711, was racing through the deep Pacific. She was a Los Angeles-class boat built for speed and stealth, and she was traveling at flank speed, more than 30 knots, at a depth of about 525 feet. Then she hit a mountain. An undersea mountain, a seamount, rose directly in her path, and she struck it head-on at full speed. The catastrophe of it is hard to overstate. A submarine, the length of a football field, slammed into solid rock in an instant. The Seamount was not on the navigation chart the crew was using. Other charts and satellite gravity data had hinted that something might be there, but those warnings were never reconciled with the operational chart. Modern seafloor mapping, including satellite gravimetry that infers underwater terrain from tiny variations in the height of the sea surface, had suggested a rise in that area, yet the crew was navigating from a chart that showed open water. The gap between what was known somewhere and what was actually loaded on the boat's chart is exactly the kind of seam where disaster hides. The impact crushed the forward ballast tanks in the bow dome, crumpling the front of the submarine like a can. Inside, men were thrown violently forward. One sailor, machinist mate second class Joseph Ashley, died of his head injuries. Somewhere between 98 and 100 crew members were hurt. And yet, remarkably, the pressure hull, the inner steel that keeps the ocean out, held. Because it held, the crew fought to save their boat, blew the tanks that still worked, and clawed their way to the surface with a shattered bow. Their damage control became a model studied ever since. The commanding officer, Commander Kevin Mooney, was relieved of command after the investigation faulted the navigation planning. The Navy repaired San Francisco in an extraordinary way, grafting the entire bow section from a decommissioned sister boat, the Honolulu, onto her hull. The photographs of her crushed nose in dry dock circled the world, and the deepest lesson was humbling. Even the navies that believe they own the deep have not truly mapped it. Seamounts crowded the western Pacific, and many are still poorly charted. A routine transit had become a head-on crash with a mountain no one knew was there. The next encounter proves the ocean gives no warning, even in shallow, familiar water. Number 9. The USS Greeneville and Ehime Maru disaster. On February 9, 2001, about 9 nautical miles south of Oahu, Hawaii, an American submarine killed 9 people in a matter of minutes, and it happened during a demonstration meant to impress guests. The submarine was USS Greeneville, hull number SSN 772, another Los Angeles-class attack boat. Aboard her that day were 16 civilian visitors hosted under a Navy Community Relations program. To show off the boat's capability, the crew performed an emergency main ballast blow, a maneuver that rockets the submarine to the surface in seconds. Directly above her, unseen, was the Ehime Maru, a Japanese fisheries high school training ship out of Uwajima, carrying students, teachers, and crew, 35 people in all. On a vessel of about 830 tons, Greeneville surged upward and struck the ship from below, her rudder tearing open the hull. The Ehime Maru flooded and sank within minutes. 9 people died, and 4 of them were teenage students. The investigation was damning. The periscope surged before the maneuver had been rushed. A sonar contact that should have warned of the ship above was not properly evaluated. The presence of civilians crowded into the control room was cited as a distraction at the critical moment. The commanding officer, Commander Scott Waddell, was reprimanded and later retired from the Navy. To his credit, Waddell apologized publicly and traveled to Japan to face the families in person. The disaster strained relations between the United States and Japan, and the Navy mounted a costly and unusual operation to raise the wreck, move it to shallower water, and recover the bodies of the victims. A memorial to them stands today at Kaka'ako Waterfront Park in Honolulu. The case is taught as a lesson in command judgment and situational awareness, in how quickly confidence becomes catastrophe. The recovery effort was itself extraordinary and costly, a deliberate national commitment to raise a sunken ship not for salvage, but so that families could bring their dead home. The Ehime Maru had carried 35 people, ordinary students and instructors, on a training voyage when a maneuver meant as a display of power turned into a peacetime tragedy that neither navy could easily forgive. A submarine's deadliest encounter that day was with a ship full of children, and the sea gave no warning at all. It would give no warning off Baton Island either. Number 10. The ROKS, Cheonan sinking. We end the descent in the modern age on the night of March 26, 2010, in the Yellow Sea near Baton Island, close to the disputed maritime border between the two Koreas. The South Korean corvette Cheonan, hull number PCC-772, a Poen-class warship of about 1,200 tons, was on patrol with 104 sailors aboard. And then, without any warning at all, the ship broke in two and sank. 46 of the 104 men were killed. There was no time to detect anything, no time to react. A multinational investigation, drawing on experts from the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, and Sweden, concluded that the Cheonan had been destroyed by an external underwater explosion. The cause, they determined, was a torpedo fired by a North Korean midget submarine, a CHT-02 D torpedo, whose recovered propulsion parts were found on the seabed bearing Korean language markings. The mechanism was especially cruel. Investigators believe it was a bubble jet effect in which the torpedo detonates beneath the keel rather than striking the hull directly, and the collapsing gas bubble snaps the ship's spine. When salvage crews raised the two halves in April of 2010, the wreckage showed exactly that signature, the hull bent upward, broken from below. North Korea denied everything and rejected the findings. A handful of independent skeptics questioned the conclusion, but the official multinational verdict pointed clearly to a torpedo attack. The consequences were severe. Tensions on the peninsula spiked, and South Korea suspended most trade with the North in what became known as the May 24th measures. The 46 lost sailors were memorialized, and the broken hull is preserved as an exhibit. The Pohang-class corvettes were built for coastal patrol and anti-submarine work, and yet one of them was destroyed by exactly the threat it was meant to guard against. The investigation's finding rested on physical evidence pulled from the seabed, the torpedo's own parts, and still the attacker denied it, which is the pattern of the deep once again. Even with the wreck raised and the fragments in hand, certainty and accountability slip apart in the water. This is one of the rare modern cases of a submarine sinking a warship in something close to open combat, and it drove home the enduring threat of small, quiet boats in contested coastal water. And here is the thread that ties a 1915 sea monster to a 2010 torpedo. In every case, the water hid what was coming until it was already too late. Step back from the individual stories, and a single pattern emerges from all 10. A submarine operates nearly blind. Light dies within tens of meters of the surface, so at patrol depth vision is useless. Sound becomes the only long-range sense a crew has, and sound can be defeated, absorbed, bent, or simply misread. Look again at what we have descended through. The monster stories were pre-sonar human beings projecting their fear onto a darkness they could not pierce. The collisions were sonar's modern failure against hulls engineered for silence. The near launch of B-59 was sensory deprivation and heat warping human judgment past its limits. The San Francisco crash was the failure of our maps rather than our ears. Different centuries, different technologies, but the same route. Incomplete information in a place that erases evidence. The deep amplifies small errors into catastrophes, because there is no room to see a mistake coming and correct it. That is why the true terror here is rarely a creature. It is uncertainty. It is the psychological weight of working somewhere you cannot see your enemy, your ally, or the mountain in front of you. And it is why rumor and record blur together so easily, because when no one can verify what happened, the story is all that survives. There is one more thread worth naming. In almost every incident, secrecy wrapped itself around the event, whether it was a war diary that omitted a monster, a navy slow to explain a collision, or a state flatly denying an attack. The deep does not just hide submarines, it hides the truth of what they did down there. To understand the collisions, you have to understand how a submarine hides, and why hiding so well can be lethal. There are two kinds of sonar. Active sonar sends out a ping and listens for the echo, but doing so announces your own position to everyone in the water, so a submarine trying to stay hidden almost never uses it. Instead, it relies on passive sonar, simply listening. And passive listening only works if the target makes noise, so navies wage a relentless war on their own sound. They cover their hulls in anechoic tiles that absorb and scatter incoming pings. They mount engines and pumps on isolating rafts, so vibration never reaches the water. They replace churning propellers with smooth pump jet propulsors. The result is a boat that can be quieter than the background noise of the ocean itself. Now add the ocean's own tricks. Layers of different temperature and salinity, called thermoclines, bend sound and create shadow zones where a submarine simply disappears. The deep sound channel can carry noise for thousands of miles or swallow it entirely. Biological sound, the clicks and groans of sea life, masks the faint signature of machinery. Stack all of this together and you understand Vanguard and Le Triomphant, two boats so silent they close to collision range undetected, You understand the Song-class boat surfacing beside a carrier. This is the paradox at the center of modern submarine warfare. The better a boat hides, the more dangerous its own silence becomes, and the harder the Navy must work simply to keep its hunters from colliding in the dark. There is a constant arms race between quieting and detection. Every advance that makes a boat harder to hear pushes the other side to build more sensitive arrays, faster processors, and smarter software to pull a whisper of machinery out of a roaring ocean. Towed arrays, long strings of hydrophones dragged behind a submarine, extend its hearing but carry blind spots of their own, particularly directly ahead and directly astern. The silence is never truly perfect, but it is often perfect enough. If you assume all of this is solved, the honest answer is that it is not. Most of the seafloor has still never been mapped at high resolution, which is exactly why an uncharted seamount could crush the bow of a nuclear submarine in 2005. Unexplained sonar contacts are still logged and never resolved. Distinguishing a living animal from a machine in raw acoustic data remains genuinely hard, which is why so many mysterious sounds stay unidentified for years. Midget submarines, like the one blamed for the Cheonan, are especially difficult to detect in shallow, noisy coastal water, and satellites and aircraft can only do so much over deep ocean. Efforts like the International Seabed 2030 project aim to map the entire ocean floor, but full coverage is still years away. Meanwhile, modern boats using air-independent propulsion can stay submerged and silent longer than ever, and tracking several quiet contacts at once strains even the best sensor networks. Some historical wrecks, remember, still cannot be identified with certainty, which is how folklore keeps filling the space that instruments cannot. And at the level of nations, deniability does the rest. When a state does not want an undersea incident confirmed, the ambiguity of the deep becomes a shield. And the blind spot is not only technical, it is political, because transparency and military secrecy pull in opposite directions, and every navy would rather leave a rival guessing than confirm what its sensors can and cannot do. The honest admission at the center of all this is uncomfortable. We still perceive only a sliver of what moves through the deep ocean at any given moment. The ocean, for all our technology, remains a strategic blind spot. None of this is history safely behind us. The great power competition beneath the waves is intensifying. The Chinese submarine fleet has expanded dramatically since that 2006 surfacing beside Kitty Hawk. Russia and the NATO navies continue to modernize their deterrent forces, the silent ballistic missile boats that never stop hiding. Quiet diesel and air-independent submarines are proliferating to navies around the world. Attention is turned to the undersea infrastructure we all depend on, the cables and pipelines running across the seabed and to the Arctic, where retreating ice is opening new water to contest. Unmanned underwater vehicles are beginning to change the very nature of the hunt. Close-in surveillance operations, the kind that put Baton Rouge in the Barents Sea, still go on, and as fleets grow, so does the risk of another accidental collision. That is why deconfliction agreements matter, why every incident feeds new doctrine and new training, and why navies are investing in seabed sensor networks. The vulnerability a quiet boat exposes against a carrier group has not gone away. Neither has the deterrent logic that keeps missile submarines perpetually hidden, nor the tension between staying hidden and staying safe. Look at the escalation risk in a place like the Yellow Sea where the Cheonan died, and you see how a single undersea act can ripple upward into a confrontation between nations. The lessons of every incident in this descent still shape how crews are trained and how fleets are told to behave, precisely because the deep remains a contested frontier that no one fully controls. And through all of it runs the one factor no technology removes: the human being, under pressure, in the dark. Trace the whole arc one more time, from a sea monster reported off Ireland in 1915 to a torpedo splitting a warship in 2010. The technology changed beyond recognition, the constant did not. In every single case, human beings entered a place that hides everything, and the place kept its secrets until the last possible moment. The fear of the unseen came long before sonar, and has outlived it. The heroism and the error of individuals, of von Forstner staring at the sky, an Arkhipov refusing an order, a captain rushing a periscope sweep, played out again and again in the dark. The ocean served as both battlefield and archive, preserving the machines far better than the people trapped inside them. What all of this tells you is that the deep does not need monsters to terrify. It only needs to be what it already is: vast, lightless, and unmapped, a place where the most advanced machines humanity has ever built can still be blindsided by silence. Somewhere out there right now, contacts are being logged that no one can explain, and boats are hiding in water no chart fully knows. The next encounter is only a matter of time, and the ocean, patient as ever, is still keeping watch in the dark, holding on to everything it has swallowed, and waiting to show us only as much as it chooses.